Mairead Dundas, we heard Andrew Hillier mention in that report some of the remedies. What needs to be done? What needs to be done fast?
Yeah, we need to start acting more seriously and more comprehensively than we have up until now. We would all love a silver bullet solution. It doesn't exist. The intricate nature of our ecosystem means we're going to have dozens or even hundreds of measures required. Of course, we're all responsible, humans being the culprits, but governments do need to lead the way. They need to start protecting species. They need to start limiting the illegal trafficking of animals. And importantly, we heard it referred to there by the butterfly expert, we need to limit the amount of land that we clear to make way for our farms, for our cities, for our industry. But we also need to change the way we create energy. We saw riding bikes, that's a great way, but also we need to keep those fossil fuels in the ground and stop giving those subsidies to the companies that extract them. But François, even you and I can make a difference. Our little pings at home, we can be less demanding in our consumption. We can change the way we eat. We know that red meat uses more land than, say, vegetables, so we can vary our diet accordingly. Even more simple than that, if you've got a garden or a balcony, you can plant a tree or a flower that is friendly to those bees we all need to feed the population that's growing.
All right. Catherine McKenna, you hear there some of the remedies that are recommended. In that biodiversity report, you hail from a nation that well, they love the outdoors, they love the environment, and yet the big money makers are extraction industry and agriculture. So what do you do when you're Canadian?
Well, so we actually just announced $1 billion towards a historic nature legacy fund. So protecting more of nature and our natural spaces is extraordinarily important, and making sure that you have recovery plans for species at risk. We have more than 500 species at risk. So we're really putting our money where our mouth is and also doing unique things, looking at how we work with Indigenous peoples. So in our north, Canada has one of the largest tracts of remaining wilderness. So we have a huge responsibility, and we recognize that. So working with the Inuit in our north to protect more of the Arctic, but of course transitioning to a cleaner future. And I think this report was also important because for the first time, we're actually really linking climate change to biodiversity and raising the profile of the biodiversity challenge. Because in some ways, there hasn't been as much focus. We've always known that there's been a challenge with biodiversity, but saying like climate change is an accelerator, and the solutions actually help both. So if you use mangroves, that's good to as a carbon sink, but it also protects countries that are being attacked, that have these extreme weather events. So there are solutions, and I think we know what the solutions are. That's why this biodiversity charter was so important. Canada's had it. We just had 2 weeks ago a Nature Champion Summit, because we're leading into 2020, where China is hosting a big summit on biodiversity, and we need to see more ambition from countries.
You talk about climate change accelerating the loss of biodiversity. We also know that when you were given the mandate, the ministership, part of the deal was to phase out fossil fuels as quickly as possible. But your country's still propping up the oil and gas industry into the billions of dollars. It's 2019. It's been several years now. Why hasn't Canada made?
Well, so it is actually really important to point out the facts. We have phased out 8 of 9 fossil fuel subsidies in our tax system. We recognize that. We have a climate plan. We're making historic investments in renewable energy. We're phasing out coal. We have a just transition workforce, because as you phase out fossil fuels, you need to make sure workers at the heart of it, or you run into real trouble. People marching in the street. And we just put a price on pollution across the country. April 1st, no longer free. Carbon pollution no longer free, but we're returning the money back to people so they have choices, but they also, life is affordable. Because I think, look, you have to figure this out. Every country, I know in France, there are challenges as you move forward to tackle climate change. We've seen that also in Germany. They're phasing out coal, but a lot later. And so I think, we need to link all of these things, and we need to have a plan. So Canada has a climate change plan. We have a plan to protect nature. And we also need to bring in a whole array of partners, because there's a lot of focus on governments. I think national government's extremely important. We saw that in terms of the Paris Agreement too. But you need to bring in business. So we had AXA today. They made an announcement, a $200 million fund to ensure more of nature. So really looking at these new tools that you can bring in private sector, Indigenous peoples, cities have to be part of it. So really across the board approach if we're going to be serious about tackling climate change and nature loss.
Now, you won a victory in the courts, it seems, last
We did.
In, what is it, Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
where you talked about putting a price on pollution. They ruled you had the right to do so, but you've got other lawsuits of the same nature coming up in other provinces, most notably Ontario.
Well, I'm feeling quite confident. So we're a federation, so we have to work with provinces and territories. The environment is a shared area of jurisdiction. So we said to provinces, we need a price on pollution across the country. Pollution doesn't know any borders. You have an opportunity to do it yourself. We do have conservative governments, provincial governments who have backtracked. We've said, well, we're moving forward with this. The Prime Minister was extremely clear, no longer free to pollute, and some of them have taken us to court. But the
rhetoric's been a little bit nasty, it seems, at times.
It is. I mean,
does it feel a little bit like this is Canada's sort of Brexit divide, this issue of the carbon tax?
I think it's a divide where conservative politicians want to do less and less. The Canadians I talk to, they want to see action on climate change. We had forest fires last summer that burning in the West. We had extreme heat that people were dying in Ontario and Quebec. We have floods right now. I don't know if you've shown them here, but we have huge flooding around where I live in Ontario and Quebec. People recognize that climate change is real, but what they want to see is serious action and a plan. So we have a plan across the board, but they also want life to be affordable, and they want to be part of the transition. You have to figure out a just transition for workers. So I think the former Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, he said, Canadians are be reasonable. So I feel like we have a very ambitious, but also approach that puts people at the center of it.
Because when Justin Trudeau came to power, he announced a grand bargain when it came to the issue of getting, most notably, the hydrocarbons out of the soil in places like Alberta, but at the same time, putting a price on pollution. Is that going to backfire, though, when you have a general election coming up this October? Because we've seen here in France when the whole Yellow Vest movement began with a fuel tax.
Well, so this is why, and I've learned this. So I'm now the second longest serving environment minister. I started actually my career in France with the Paris Agreement, helping negotiate an ambitious agreement. I really have learned that you have to have people at the heart of it. So put a price on pollution, but give the revenues back so people have choices. Life has to be affordable. Alberta came up. We had a progressive government there that said they phased out coal, hard cap on emissions, price on pollution. But they still need to get a reasonable price for their resources because we have one market, the United States. You might agree that that's an unreliable partner. But we got to figure out this transition. And so, yes, there will be an election, but we're feeling very confident that Canadians recognize that we need to take action. We have no choice. There's a huge cost we are all paying right now. And we had a science report that we released a few weeks ago, said that Canada's warming at twice the global average. In our north, 3 times or more. We have no choice, and we need to be part of the solution.
But as a politician, is it difficult because explaining a carbon tax and how you redistribute the wealth, it's complicated, whereas bashing it is easy.
Yeah, but you know what? As I say, Canadians are reasonable people. We put a price on pollution. So if you say to someone who's a kid in the street, if it's free to pollute, do you think you have more or less pollution? They'll say, you'll have more pollution. So what we are doing through our tax system, so when people file their taxes, in a family of 4 in Ontario got $307. So it's very concrete. But you have to continue to talk about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you have to bring folks together.
You touched on the United States there. We know that the final press release to come out of this G7 meeting over the last 2 days has a separate paragraph just to mark the differences, the divergences of the United States. Greenpeace and other organisations are saying that when it comes to the environment, we might need to start thinking about a G6. Is that something you're open to?
Look, I think it's better to have the U.S. at the table. This is not new, by the way. I mean, I worked very closely with the Obama administration. We have, agreements that we're still adhering to our part of the bargain with the United States. But yes, the Trump administration has taken a different route. We all know that. Every G7, it's the same thing, the separate paragraph or footnote. But, look, I think it is important you continue to engage people. And I keep on saying, you want jobs, you want to grow your economy, you've got to transition. And they did sign on to the biodiversity charter. So, it's not perfect.
It's quite empty as a charter. There's not much we agree to work together. We've heard that quite a lot.
Well, they agreed to ambition in 2020 that we need to be tackling biodiversity loss. Look, I think it's better to have them at the table, actually having a serious conversation and having to listen to other countries saying, this is what we're doing, climate change is real, we're linking climate change to biodiversity loss. I think that's more productive because the problem, what I worry about is polarization. We've talked about it a bit it in Canada. We see it here in France, that we have to find a way to have better conversations. We need to be absolutely ambitious, but we need to be figuring out how we're bringing people together. Otherwise, who's the loser? The environment is, and we all are.
All right, one final question on this, Catherine McKenna. Right now, you have a free trade agreement that was signed between Canada and the European Union. It's still to be ratified by many states, including France. Now, that free trade agreement is called CETA. Its stated ambition is 25% more trade. Yet, what the Biodiversity Summit recommends, among its recommendations, is short supply chains. So not so much trade with countries that are far away.
So I actually have a bit of a different view there. I think that progressive trade agreements are really important. And this is a progressive trade agreement. Canada and France are working together on so many files in terms of more ambition on climate change. We are hosting a joint summit on pricing pollution.
But should we be getting less stuff from the other side of the world?
Well, look, it's actually good for France. So we've just looked at the numbers under CETA, which is currently in effect. 10% exports have grown by 10%. That's jobs. People do need jobs. Canadians love French cheese, by the way. So there's been a huge increase in cheese. And there are differences. Like I know in France, they have different standards for beef. So we are not exporting much beef at all here to France. So you have to respect each other's laws. But we need clean solutions. For example, clean tech. I was here with a delegation from Quebec and France. We need to be trading in solutions, and we need to be creating jobs, because I do think the Yellow Vest movement and other movements are people who are worried about this transition. What does it look like? Will people have jobs? Will life be affordable? And those are reasonable concerns. At the same time, I totally applaud the youth marching in the streets saying we've got to do more. So we have to figure this out. That is why we work so hard. That is why I work so hard to be the environment minister for everyone. I can't just be the environment minister for environmentalists. I have to be the environment minister for people who are trying to figure out how do they fit in this transition. But we have to push ambition. And we are there with France, pushing on climate, on nature, and progressive governments need to stand together. I made that point. I had a very good conversation with the Minister de Régie. We have a great relationship with France, and we need to be standing together.
All right. Many thanks, Catherine McKenna, for stopping by.
Thank you.
I want to thank as well Mairead Dundas. Stay with us. There's more to come. You're on France 24. More news, plus the day's business and sports.